This is the hiking and tent camping guide for Patagonia's Torres del Paine Part 3, covering the lower part of the O Trail. The previous Part 2 covered the upper part of the O Trail. The links to the 5 parts are found in my YouTube repository given here. This Part 3 covers the O Trail from Paso Campground to the Central Torres Campground. The popular W Trail is part of the O Trail, but also covers the dead-end trails into the Francis Valley and the Torres Valley. The many hikers for the W Trail enter either by bus at the Central Torres or at Paine Grande by boat via Pejo Lake. The Gray Campground is the end of the upper part of the O Trail and also a part of the W Trail. This part covers the hike from Paso to Gray, Paine Grande, Italiano, Cuanas, and completing the O Trail loop at the Central Torres Campground. We start with the hike from Paso to Gray. Paso was covered in Part 2. The hike to Gray is largely downhill, but has several uphill sections. Being a trail on a mountain hillside, it is, as expected, somewhat strenuous. You may encounter very strong winds sweeping down over the Gray Glacier, which makes the hike more demanding. You may have to cross quebradas that can be very dangerous and unpassable after heavy rainfall. What you see here is probably the best condition you can hope for at this quebrada crossing. However, there are suspension bridges for safe crossing, provided you do not exceed the maximum capacity and assuming they are properly maintained. These problems are offset by the spectacular views of the glacier spilling into the Gray Lake. You are advised to get up-to-date information about the availability of suspension bridges and trail conditions before venturing out on the O Trail. The Gray Campground is a large area with good facilities. You have a lot of visitors because of the many W Trail hikers wanting to get a good view of the Gray Glacier, which is spectacular as it spills into the Gray Lake. The next hike from Gray to Paine Grande has a lot of uphill and downhill sections, but the trail is in good condition. In contrast to the one-directional upper part of the O Trail, the W Trail has a lot of two-way traffic. It is a whole different experience with a great number of hikers, where you frequently have to negotiate the trail with the oncoming hikers heading towards Gray to see the glacier area. That enthusiasm is understandable because heading towards the glacier area or looking back as you walk towards Paine Grande, you have some spectacular scenery. Not too far from Paine Grande, you also encounter some very picturesque areas with beautiful small lakes and ponds and nice vegetation. Arriving at Paine Campground gives you a clear demonstration of what effects a poorly controlled private ownership enterprise type of concession can have on a park. An excessive number of hikers arrives by boat via Pejo Lake from the Pudito jetty several times a day. Setting up tent in such a large, very crowded, totally bare area next to a big ugly hotel is depressing. My greatest enjoyment of this camping area was to leave it early next morning. The trail from Paine Grande to Italiano is relatively easy. You may still find some poorly constructed and maintained bridges where you need to pay attention to the handwritten signs about their capacity that may be questionable considering their poor condition. Italiano was a very poorly designed and maintained camping area. How about having the only cooking shelter designated as a smoking area? Just ridiculous. The ranger hut had piped running water inaccessible to the hikers who had to follow the water sign for water and negotiate a lot of obstacles to get water. It had some serious problems in terms of availability of the staffing. The posted requirement of only one night stay makes it practically impossible to fully explore the adjoining Francis Valley for hikers on the O Trail. The toilet facilities were just disgusting and in disrepair, tempting the hikers to do their business nearby. The only benefit of Italiano was that it offered the opportunity to explore the adjacent, very scenic Francis Valley, not carrying a large backpack. The trail from Italiano to Cuernos is largely downhill. Typical for a mountainside trail, you experience a lot of downhill and uphill sections, making the trail strenuous, but the first section of the trail is fairly flat, where you encounter some very nice open forested area. You will get to the Francis campground on your way to Cuernos. Why should an important staff person like this have to beg for money in a national park that generates a multi-million-dollar revenue for the privately owned enterprise type of concession holders? Why should such a person have to sleep in a tent? I just wonder. Continuing on the trail, you will enjoy the nice scenery as you head towards the more demanding portions on the uneven hillside. Having completed the more difficult portion, you will finally get the enjoyment of a much needed break at water's edge. The facilities at Cuernos are very good. Setting up a tent on a wooden platform is a true pleasure, and the nature scenery is spectacular here. The camping area could have been much better if the individual tent sites had been better spread out for more privacy. It is unfortunate that booking a tent site at this campground required a payment for breakfast and dinner, something that many campers do not need. The trail from Cuernos to Central is quite long, and feels especially long with the great number of hills. It is worth taking several breaks and enjoy some of the spectacular views of the mountainsides you pass by. You will meet a lot of east and westbound travelers on the W Trail, quite a different experience from the one-directional walk on the upper part of the less traveled O Trail. You will cross a number of suspension bridges where you have to pay attention to the maximum capacity before entering the bridge. As you get closer to Central, you get to some very picturesque small lakes. Offloading your gear and making a little side trip to explore this area is enjoyable, much more enjoyable than spending your time at the nearby very busy central camping area. Most hikers completing their week-long hike around the Paine Massif on the O Trail will end up returning to Central Torres campsite. After a night of hopefully restful sleep, you will likely next morning head back to the bus stop at the Welcome Center and take the minibus to Laguna Amaga and then transfer to a larger bus to Puerto Natales. This completes the description of hiking and tent camping the complete O Trail. If this has enticed you to go there, you may like to watch part 4 dealing with preparations and transport. However, before you do that, I advise you to view my review and rating of the park as a destination for tent camping hikers in part 5. I give it a low rating of 6 out of 10 and do not recommend it for such activity. You may have better options many other places.